In this week's tutorial, I am going to show you how to make a table runner out of 2.5-inch strips or even a jelly roll if you want to, which we will talk about in a few minutes. Now, I struggled to make this tutorial mostly because there are so many variables to it. So here's the deal I want to make with you. Ask questions in the comments, email me about this if I miss anything, but I will do my best to try to discuss the different variables or different roadblocks that you might run into when making this. So you want to see what we're making now? It's not going to be in this colorway, another variable. This was the first one I made using this pattern, and I did use a jelly roll for this. I love the way this turned out. In fact, I think I want to make this into a whole quilt, another variable. I also made a Halloween placemat. Yes, you can make placemats. And I made a scrappy version in fall fabrics, and this is all from scraps, not a jelly roll. What I did do was decide to take a jelly roll and see how many of these that I could get and to figure out the sizes and all the math and all that great stuff that we need to know as quilters. The jelly roll I used is this one, and I will show you the mostly finished products of that at the end. I probably could get 4 of these table runners out of one jelly roll, but safely you can get 3 of these table runners, and then you'll have some extras you could use for binding or even for another project. If you pushed it though, you could probably get 4. The math says you should get 4. Again, variables, variables, variables. I wonder how many times I can say variable in this video. So let's get started, but before we do, my name is Chris O'Neill, the person who's been rambling here, talking to you, and I'm from Sew the Distance, and I'm so glad that you are here joining me for this tutorial on how to make a really easy and fun and beginner-friendly, all of the stuff, table runner. And this is the jelly roll that I'm going to be using. Again, it's an older jelly roll, but the reason this is so good is because there's a variety of colors, which we'll talk about in a minute. So let's get started. On the screen now, you're gonna see the supplies for the table runner that I am going to make today using a jelly roll. Now, I want to just warn you, there is some waste, but I'll give you some ideas on how to use up those pieces. You also need general sewing supplies, which are listed here, but these are all things that as quilters we usually have. And as always, this will all be on my blog, so you can check it out if you want more guidance on this process, and of course, ask questions. So opening this jelly roll is tricky sometimes. It's also, because it's so pretty, you don't want to open it, but we're gonna open it because we're gonna use it, okay? It's gonna be okay. I do have a video called Everything Jelly Rolls where I talk about this, but if you didn't see that, I love these pet lint rollers because they're stickier. So we're gonna take off the plastic. If yours has plastic, they don't always have plastic. And what I like to do first is just get as much of, look at it all flying, of the lint off of the sides. So just take a lint brush to it. It doesn't take care of it all, as you can see, it's flying, but it does take care of a lot of it, and it'll keep it off your sewing surface. Now let's talk about this jelly roll in particular. You can see this has a wide variety of colors. So there's a lot of lights, mediums, and darks. They're not all like this. Sometimes you'll get, especially with batiks, you'll get all darks. And because of that, you might have to add some lights, because the light fabrics, or the contrasting fabric, I should say, is what really makes this come together. But you can also use your stash for that too. That's okay. Like I said, you can make 3, probably 4 out of a jelly roll like this. I've never used this particular jelly roll to make this, so I'm not sure what we're gonna find out. We're gonna also unroll this, and I'm gonna show you how I treat this fabric when I do unroll it. So let's do that. Okay, so I have the jelly roll here. I'm gonna take this off. You can see, look at, there's already, there's already lots of lint coming off of it, even though we did that. That's okay. All right, so we're gonna unroll this. This is so pretty. I love this jelly roll set. I got it for Christmas a few years ago, and it is so pretty. I never wanted to use it, but today's the day. So I'm going to pick out 10 light and 10 dark, and I'm going to try not to have duplicates. So let me first separate this out a little bit. Okay, so for this one, there's some really dark fabrics. There's some light, and then there's these that are medium. And then we have some that are in between, not super dark like these, just middle of the road. So we have some decisions to make. Do we want to use greens? Do we want to use only purples? Do we want to use a mix? And this is just a decision that's all up to you. So my first step with this is to cut these in half. I want to have a lot of variety in my table runner. So I want to take 10 of the darks and 10 of the lights and cut them in half. That way I'll have a nice variety. And we're gonna do this for each one. I'm gonna take a darker one so it shows up on camera. First thing I'm gonna do is cut off these ends. I'm gonna keep them together so it's folded still, and I'm just gonna cut them off. It's gonna make our life easier in the end. And then I'm gonna cut this fold. Now you can cut right on the fold if you want. I find sometimes the folds are wonky, so I just cut right next to them like that. Just a little bit off. And then I'm gonna separate them. I'm gonna take one and put the other one aside for another table runner or another project. And I'm gonna go through and do that with all of these. Okay, now that we have 10 lights and 10 darks, and they should measure around, well, 2.5 inches, that's pretty much given. And the length should be around 22 inches. The reason it's not exact is because jelly roll strips vary in length as a whole because it's the width of fabric, and widths of fabric vary because of the repeat and the printing and all of that. So they're not gonna be exactly that size, and within these there's probably gonna be some differences. So they're not gonna line up necessarily perfectly, and that's okay. At least in the length, I mean. The width they should. And I know people are gonna ask about the pinked edges. I already measured these and I know that they're 2.5 to the tip of the pink, whatever. The tip of the end here. Next, I'm gonna take one of each of the darker fabrics and one of the lights. I'm gonna try not to get the same print. See how they're the same print? So I'm gonna try to mix it up a little bit, like this one, and I'm gonna put it right sides together, just like that. Line it up really well, and sew 1/4 inch down one side. And I'm gonna do that with all of these. All right, I'm here at my sewing machine. I have an off-white thread in the machine, and then I have all of my 10 sets, so light and dark, put together with clips. I'm gonna use a 1/4 inch seam allowance, but just use whatever you're comfortable with. We'll adjust when we trim these up. That's what makes this so beginner friendly, because really if you're off a little bit, as long as you're consistent with your seam allowance, it's not gonna matter. Okay, these are all sewn together into units, and I'll show you one of them. You can see. Ooh, look how pretty. So next we're gonna set the seam by just ironing it with it flat like this, and then I'm going to open it and press that seam to the dark side. So it'll look like this. It really doesn't matter which side you press to for this step, so don't worry about that. You can even press open if you want to. Just press it really well. These are all pressed. Oh my goodness, they're so pretty. I cannot wait to see how this all comes together. This is so exciting. Okay, so next we are going to chunk these up into blocks, so let's do it. So before I had said that it really didn't matter as long as you're consistent with the seam allowance, and I'm gonna show you what I mean now. So I'm gonna put these aside, just take one of these, and then I'm gonna take a 4.5 inch ruler. I like using this because I can cut on both sides. I'm able to cut on both sides, but I realize not everybody is. I'm also gonna show you how to cut with a regular, bigger ruler, which I have one here. The first thing you're gonna do is you're gonna measure, now mine is measuring exactly at 4.5 inches. If yours isn't, if it's say measuring 4.25, that's okay. You're just gonna cut this way 4.25. So what you're making is a square. Because mine is 4.5, and you know how I like to turn my mats over when I'm making accurate cuts, because these lines on the other side can get wonky, and this is a really old mat, so I know they're probably not that accurate. And what I'm gonna do is line this up so one of the lines on my ruler is on my seam line here in the middle. And I'm gonna show you the way I like to do it, and then I'm gonna show you other alternative methods. So I'm gonna trim off this end to make sure that it's square. Put that aside, and then I like to just go right to this side. Now I could walk around the table if I want to use the same hand, and that's one block. Next, I would take this over and I would actually leave a little bit on this edge because I want to make sure I have nice square blocks. I cut a little off, get that out of the way, and then cut this side. Okay? Now if you can't do that or don't want to do that or don't have a ruler that size, that's fine. You can still make this block. We're going to turn this around. So this is my cut edge. I know that this is straight, and I'm gonna line up 4.5 inches on my ruler here, and I'm gonna make sure that that seam line is also straight, and it is. And here we go. And then I'm gonna cut. Same way, and then just keep going. And you should get, out of this whole strip, you should get 4 of these blocks and then a little bit. Like I said, there's some waste. I'm going to show you how to use these at the end. So here we are. And cut. And we're going to set this aside. And then I'm going to keep going with all of these until I have 39 of these blocks. Okay, so I have all of the blocks. I have 39, and we're going to lay this out. Now it's going to be on point. Our block, you could lay it out like this. This would be the straight way, or straight setting, I guess. But we're going to be laying it out like this and like this. So we're going to make it on point. So the point is at the top. So I'm going to lay these out and I'll show you how I do it. The first row across the top is going to be set like this. So we have the dark side down, light side up. You can do it however you want. Play with this. The zigzags will change as you change it. So that's totally up to you. And I'm just going to do 4 across just like that. The next row, we're going to put 3 in here. And we're going to make it like this, okay? And that's gonna give us a zigzag going down, and they're all gonna be like this, going this way. So there's 2 orientations of the block. One is like this, and one is like this. And that's it, there's no more. You're just gonna always be turning them for that orientation. All right, so now we have 4 across, 3. Next we're gonna do 4. And again, we're going to alternate between them, just like this. So we're just repeating this top row. Okay, and we're just gonna keep going all the way down until we have all of these gone, all 39. So there are 4 across, 6 down. If you wanna make this smaller, you just take out some rows. If you wanna make it bigger, you just add some rows. When you go to add width, that's where it gets a little tricky, because usually you have to add 2 more blocks to each side, so it no longer becomes a table runner. I love this. Now is the time you can go through, and so I don't definitely care for these 2 together, so I might move this one, I don't know, here, and play with it like that. And play with it, you know, move it around if you want to. But overall, I love it. Now, construction of this, instead of doing rows across, well, you can't do that because we're on point. We're going to do rows diagonal. So you're gonna sew these 3 together, then these 5 together, and then these, what, 6, 7 together, and keep going. When you sew these together, you're going to press to the full piece. So, for example, these 2, when I sew these 2 together, right sides together, I'm going to sew at this seam, and then I'm going to press to this side. So I'm not going to press over that seam. That way, these blocks will all nest when you have the rows sewn together. So the rows are together, and it looks a little funny because I separated the rows so you can see them. And you can see how the rows are a little off center. So what I mean is, like, this guy here is going to have to be centered on this. Same thing here. And as we get down, we're going to have some that are a little off. So this is going to hang over, and this is going to hang over. That's okay, because the way we pressed them, if you remember, let me take one down. We pressed so it goes to that full piece. That's going to make all of this nest together. Isn't that great? You just have to pay attention when you're sewing them together, how they go and what hangs over where. So what I like to do is keep them up on my design board, or you could lay them on a table, laid out exactly. And then when you go to sew these together, you make sure you flip them in the right direction. I'm going to show you what I mean. So I'm going to start, I like to start in the middle here. I know I'm weird, but these are tricky to get together, I think, more so than those. So these 3 I will sew first. And all I'll do is take it from my design board, and I know that's how it has to go. I know my seams are gonna nest. And right here, while it's on the design board, I will pin it at least once. And that's the way it works in my brain. And you can see that this one's going to be hanging over, so I'm going to start sewing in here and sew a 1/4 inch all the way down, and this one's going to be hanging over too. I do have one finished. Actually, let me show it to you. Remember how I said I had that Christmas set? here is one that is sewn together. And you can see, let's see, I sewed it together. Let's see, it was this way. You can see on the back how it just kind of lines up and works out. We're gonna be trimming this down anyway after we quilt it. It's not gonna be a problem, I promise. It's all done. Look at it, isn't it pretty? Oh my goodness, I love how it came out. Now when you're pressing these rows, as you sew them, after you sew them, make sure that you press them nice and flat. It doesn't matter which direction you press them, even if you press them open, whatever works for you, the important thing is that it's flat. At this point you have two options. You can trim this down now and then sandwich your table runner top at that point after you trimmed it and then quilt it, or you can leave it as is, quilt it, and then trim it. Either way, I'm going to show you how to trim them. Don't worry about that, but I do want to show you the two different ways. I trimmed this one before I quilted it just to see what it was like. And honestly, there were some issues with it because all of these edges are weird. They're bias or sort of bias, and they want to stretch and didn't behave super well. So that's the downside. The upside is that you have all of these pieces on the edges so you can reuse those pieces without picking anything out. Now, if you do it this way, you cut it down first, I highly recommend giving yourself some wiggle room in here because quilts will stretch, fabrics will stretch and move as they are quilted. Now, here's another one, same line of fabric. This one I quilted with it like this before trimming it, and I'm gonna trim it after. The downside of this is you use more batting and you use more of the backing. You also, when we cut these points off, you'll have to pick out the threads if you want to save some of this fabric. All right, so for this one, I am going to leave it as is to quilt it. I'm also going to use fusible fleece. I like fusible fleece for batting just because table runners, I don't know, they lay nice and flat. It's thin and it's wonderful. So next steps, I'm going to fuse this to the fusible fleece. I'm going to tape this to a flat surface and get it nice and flat, and then I'll lay this on top and pin baste it so it all stays together. Take it to the machine to quilt it. The table runner is quilted and it just comes to life, doesn't it? I just love it. Now we're going to trim it up. You can do this with any ruler. So we're going to line up the 1/4 inch line right here, and we're going to make sure it's a 1/4 inch over that line going that way, okay? Because we need a 1/4 inch, that's our seam allowance when we bind it. Just lined up on that point as best as possible. Then on this side, same thing. I'm going to make sure that I'm a 1/4 inch over from that point. Take my rotary cutter, here we go. This is the scary part, right? And just cut. And I'm not going to go all the way because, well, actually we're going to go a little further than that. But we're going to also square up those corners. All right. So now I'm going to turn this because I want this line here. And I'm lining it up again on this side. Also making sure that it is a right angle on this corner. And I'm going to step up and go over here and line that up. All right, we're getting there. And just to get this out of the way, I'm going to cut it right in here. Okay, and then I'm just going to keep going. I'm going to turn this and just carefully make sure things are straight and trim it that way. If I'm trimming it before I quilt it, I'm doing the exact same thing. I'm just doing it without it being quilted. I'm going to go ahead and trim the rest of this up and then get to binding it. All right, it's the next day and I'm a bit of a hot mess, but you don't care, right? I didn't think so. I have the table runner all quilted. Look at how pretty. Like I said, it's not perfect, but it's in pretty good shape and we're gonna bind it, but you have to see the back. Look at how this fabric just came to life. Isn't that fun? I like to use skinnier binding strips. I know a lot of people use 2.5 inch, but personally, I like to use 1.5 inch and do a single fold. I'm gonna go and take these strips. I have 5 of them, 5 half strips. So they're 2.5 inches by about 22 inches, like we did before. I'm gonna go ahead and cut these down to 1.5 inch strips, and then I'm gonna sew them together on the diagonal. And to do that, I'm just gonna place them like this and sew on the diagonal. So I have a really pretty connection and it just makes it lie flatter. Now that I have this long strip ready to go pressed, I'll start like somewhere in here. About halfway down that side with the right side down facing. So I'm going to show you how I stitch this on, how I miter those corners, because everybody wants to know how to do that. So let's do it. All right, so I line that up. I'm going to put my 1/4 inch foot on and move my needle over. And for this, I'll use about 2.2 stitch length. And I'll start stitching until I get to this corner. I'll start stitching till I get a 1/4 inch from the corner. That's an important part. Again, on my foot, I have a marking right here that's a 1/4 inch. So I'm just gonna go till the edge of this is at that 1/4 inch. Okay, there. Now I'm gonna lift my presser foot, leaving my needle in and pivot and sew off that edge. Let's see how we are. Oh, perfect. Okay, so you should have a 90-degree angle like this. So you're just folding it back. And then you take it and fold it again like that. And I like to put a clip right here to hold it. And we'll turn it. And then you start stitching right on that edge. And you go all the way around doing that until you get to almost the end, which I will show you. I'm coming to the last side here. And I'm just gonna stitch down to about here. So you can see I have an overlap and I'm gonna leave these tails hanging. So I'm gonna cut my thread. I do not backstitch. I don't do any of that. So we have these 2 tails and we wanna get a miter. So I pick a spot, I don't know, somewhere like right in here, and I'll put a pin. And then you just lay one of these strips. You're gonna measure over half the size of this, half the width of this. I know it's 1.5, so half of that is 3/4 of an inch. So I'm going to measure over 3/4 of an inch and draw a line. Then I take this other guy over here and I measure this way and I mark it. Next I take my handy dandy scissors and I'm cutting on those lines. So I'm cutting this right here as straight as possible. If you need to use a rotary cutter and a ruler, you can do that too. All right, I'm gonna take this pin out. So I'm clipping it up here just to give it a little give so I have some space to work. And I'm gonna put these right sides together like this. Now, did you notice what I did? They're coming off like this, and I just flip this one right sides together on this. And then I'm gonna stitch right here, right this diagonal. So from here to here, so just like that, I'm gonna stitch. Just like that. Now always check. If it's off or you've sewed it wrong, you'll know at this point and you can just unsew this, take your seam ripper and unsew it and do it again. At this point, I'm gonna clip off this excess about a 1/4 inch away, just like before. And now I'm stitching the rest of the way, that gap that's open. Okay, now this is on and you're probably wondering, okay, now what, Chris? This is crazy. How did you do this? What do you do with this? And all I do is fold this under and bring it around and hand stitch it down to the back. That's it. When you get to the corners, they should just fall right into place and you just roll them. Oh, look at that beautiful miter. Roll them and you get your point, just like that. So let me show you a close-up of how I turn that under. So you can see here, I just roll it under and then press it down and then I'll just hand stitch it. And to hand stitch, I go in my needle and thread and I bury that knot on the one end and then I just stitch. All right, next I'm gonna show you how to use up all those scraps and some ideas for that. All right, as promised, here are some of the leftover pieces. I pulled these off of the batting. See, I still have some of this threads on it and I just seam ripped them off. And you have some funky shapes, so there's a few things you could do. You could take the ends off here and just use the fabric. You could sew these together this way, like this. But you also notice that there are different orientations of the fabric. And you can sew them together like this and they will nest. They'll be a little off and a little wonky, so they'll have to be trimmed up, but they really make a cute block. And I have one in the Christmas fabric you can see here. Look at how cute. But I also made some little tiny half square triangles. They're just adorable. And for these, this is a little bit easier to work with. These are the ends from the strip sets that we had. So you can make 4 patches and you just place them right sides together, so 1/4 inch down, and then trim it down to the size that you'd want or the size that you can get. It really depends on how much is left over on each. And look at how cute these are. And just think, if you do make 3 table runners, you'll have a whole bunch of these and you can even make another project. Oh my goodness, look how it turned out. Isn't it pretty? And look at those points on those corners. Oh, I love it. And the back, oh my goodness, the back is so pretty. I hope you enjoyed this video tutorial on this table runner. I hope you take some time to sew, and I'll see you real soon. Bye.